start our this month's lecture. This month's lecture is part of the introduction for the conversation for next week. The conversation next week will be more of a question of discussing why we pray, as well as offering various kind of tools and the like for our prayer life. What works for us and what doesn't. Today, I'm going to be talking mainly about the history of prayer. And one of the things that becomes quite clear is that prayer has been part of the human condition. It's not something limited to either the Jewish or the Christian or the Islamic traditions of faith. That prayer has existed throughout recorded history, and some of the earliest documents we have from the Sumerian period and the Egyptian period, which are starting between 3,000 years before the beginning of the Common Era. Terminology, well, it's kind of useful to explain Common Era. Common Era is what we used to call AD, and BC and AD is now, for those who want to use that, including myself, more kind of correct terminology. And before Common Era, which is Christian era, and the Common Era. So anyway, 5,000 years ago, between 6,000 and 5,000 years ago, some of the earliest documents we have are part of the religious traditions of the civilizations of Sumer in Iraq and the Egyptian civilization. And some of those early pieces of literature were prayers. It's interesting, they don't often use the language called prayer. I think this is one of the things that's kind of part of that general unease. I don't know what term you would use, but when it comes to talking about religious traditions and the like, there often seems to be this kind of sense of some things are almost exclusively Jewish or Christian, such as prayer. And so they often use language to call them like hymns or whatever, hymns to the gods or whatever, but they're prayers. And many of these examples of these prayers were dedicated to the various gods that were worshipped by these people. So there are prayers to Ishtar, there are prayers to Eridu, there are prayers to Horus. Often, and they would articulate. And this is one of the reasons, one of the basic reasons of prayer is to articulate a desire to be in a relationship with the divine. And that's a term I'll use for, what we would used to call pagan and heathen gods or whatever. That humanity has always wanted to find a way to be in relationship with the divine, find process to engage with the divine. And prayer throughout the ages has been one of those tools, one of those mechanisms we use to find a way to negotiate, to be in presence with the divine. So, for example, when I talked of Sumer in Egypt and other civilizations, often the prayers would be part of a communal event, that they would pray to the divine, a divine aspect, to look for favor in a particular event in the life of the community. So, for example, harvest times were very big times for communal prayers, when you would give thanks to the deities that you believe were responsible for ensuring that the harvest was a good harvest. And there would be part of, there would be other requests, the request from the divine would look favorably upon the community, protecting them from the various grim realities of their world. I think one of the things that's critical to remember about the world of ancient Israel, ancient Sumer, ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, and all the other ancients before them, Mesoamerica as well, for that matter, and China and the like, is they did not know what we know about how things work in the world. They had not understood the physical nature of the world around them. So when disease struck, they didn't know about the various factors that would lead to the spread of a pandemic. Considering that we know how COVID-19 was spread, and yet in many cases didn't do what was necessary to stop the spread. It's amazing that what happened in the past, was not, So to get back to the topic, the point of prayer would be to find a way to negotiate with the divine, to find out what can we do. We have this disease, or we have this drought, we have this famine. We don't understand why it's happening. So merciful Artemis, merciful whatever deity they were praying to, please help us understand what's going on. Do we need to offer something? Do we need to offer a sacrifice? Do we need to fast? Do we need to, what can we do to get your attention? And what can we do to resolve the situation? Because the point of the prayer was often a way to negotiate with the divine, to find out if the people had done something wrong, that people had committed an act of transgression that had offended the divine, that had offended the gods. And so could they find a way to rectify it? So prayer has a practical purpose. As I said, the communal aspects of prayer, you would read, religious festivals were very, very much part of the life of the non-Christian, non-Jewish world of the time. Many, later when you read about the religious festivals that happened in Rome, that happened in Athens, as well as in other parts of the other civilizations, these were great grand events. There were parades, there were events in ancient Athens, for example. Drama began as part of the religious aspects, and some of the earlier pieces of the drama would be prayers to the gods, as part of that they would be performed in a certain way, that they would be part of evocation of the gods. So prayer was part of the communal life. And, people were expected to recite the prayers as part of the larger communal effort. We were all in this together. There was, just as an aside, that was one of the reasons when Christian persecution did happen, that it was often a result of the Christians not being part of that communal prayer life of the community. We are praying to the gods because we need their help. We need them to protect us. We need them. And so when the Christians say, no, we can't participate because it's against our beliefs, the Roman and the Greek leadership in these communities would be like, what the heck? This is not just some just personal choice. You're impacting on the very life of the community itself. You are offending the gods. And when stuff happens, you have a scapegoat. If the famine doesn't end, if the town gets attacked, you have your explanation why the gods are angry, because the Christians are not joining in your prayers. So that's the kind of the background of prayer. As I said, the great festivals such as the Pantheia festival in Athens, where people would pray, they'd, take part in the celebrations, give thanks to the goddess Athena for the protection of the city, for the celebration. There would be a barbecue from the meat that was sacrificed to Athena that would then be handed out to the citizens to participate in the barbecue. And there was a whole big celebration. That's the communal prayer. Then there is the individual prayer. The prayer where you come before the gods, a specific god, ask for something specific to their sphere of influence. So, for example, you are suffering from an illness. You would go to one of the various temples dedicated to the god of healing in the Hellenistic world, for instance. Asclepius was the Greek god. There was a bunch of others who kind of had healing as a kind of sideline. So you would go to them and you would offer a prayer to them to to have healed your ailment. It could be physical ailment, psychological ailment, or you could pray to the gods looking for a resolution to a land issue. God give me justice. My brother is cheating me out of my land, or and the usual more kind of grubby mundane ones, like I want to get on with this girl. Come on, goddess of love, hear my prayer, so this girl will fall in love with me. So you have these kind of very rooted in the prayers. And one of the things that they have discovered is that the ongoing human condition of not being very nice towards one another is curse prayers. You would write your curse prayer on shard of pottery or a lead piece or whatever, and you would toss it into a well where that's where the dark gods live, for one better way of putting it, the gods of witchcraft and all that kind of stuff. And you would throw that personal request as a prayer. I pray to you, Hecate, that you will come and shrivel the legs of such and such because they cheated me in a card game, something like that. And we've seen prayers that kind of rooted in the personal grievances of just recently, just in the last few years, I think it was during the COVID pandemic, apparently a bunch of researchers found a whole collection of cursed tablets I think it was in Athens. And the general consensus on the internet was leave them alone. Don't take them out. We've got enough on our plate as without a whole whack of cursed tablets. So this is the world of prayer that exists in the larger world of the Bible. This is the pagan, the heathen, whatever terminology you want to use, the non-Jewish, the non-Christian understanding of prayer. Either you had the communal prayer, kind of cry out to either thanksgiving to the gods for the prosperity of the community, usually with gifts or whatever, and at the same time you have the more personal prayers, but they're always kind of rooted in something. There's a request for something to happen. So that's the kind of the larger, the universal human. And as I said, prayer exists in civilization all around. It's obviously we hear of the prayer life of the Indian communities that were emerging in the Indian subcontinent, China, Japan, Mesoamerica. They were prayer rituals part of their life. So, and of course, there's a prayer life of the oral communities as well. But the prayers that were handed over from generation to generation, by the various indigenous peoples and the like. That this is a universal belief that you can contact the divine through prayer. And so, of course, exhibit number one, the Bible. We have the history of prayer in the Bible. And once more, we have the communal and the personal. Now, there are some fairly interesting differences in terms of the communal and the thanksgiving and the personal prayers as they evolve in the First Testament. That the people of Israel used those forms of prayer, and in some ways very similar, like particularly the thanksgiving communal prayers. That the evidence seems to point that some of the early religious life of people of Israel, and once more we're talking about 1100, 1200 BCE, before Common Era, after the events of the Exodus during the time of settlement or the time of King David, that there seems to be evidence that shows that the people of Israel gathered in thanksgiving. They would offer sacrifices to God and take the meat from the sacrifices and share it as part of the Thanksgiving meal. And we believe that there were prayers that they would recite as part of that experience. And the whole communal understanding of prayer is something that is right through the history of Scripture. We hear about it, the establishment of the kingdom itself. We hear of the psalms, of the prayers that are offered as the community recognizes the beginning of the kingdom. When the temple is built, we hear of prayers being recited. The community gathers to give thanks for the building of this temple and this new way of connecting with God. We hear the prayers of lamentation on the community in exile as they reflect on the end of the kingdom and as they fear for what happens next. And we also hear of the communal prayer when the exile ends and the community gathers in the rebuilding of Jerusalem, and they say prayers of thanksgiving to God as they renew their relationship with God. So for the whole of the First Testament, the communal prayer has been very much part of that relationship. Now, one of the things that scholarship has also been showing is that some of the prayers or the hymns, whatever term, sometimes terms are kind of interchangeable, that some of the prayers are some of the earliest pieces of the Bible composed. And what I mean by that is the first pieces were either written down or recited or whatever. In terms of dating, like the Bible, though the Bible describes events, probably first serious events it describes probably happened between 2000 and 1000 BCE, probably mid there. In terms of the events being composed, being written down and all that kind of stuff, that only really starts happening 1100, 1000 BCE. And interestingly enough, the first events they describe are probably fairly close. Anyway, that's a collection. Anyway, but the prayers are some of the first. And I'm going to take a bit of time to recite one of the first, because this is one of the first pieces of scripture written or composed, and it's a prayer. It's a prayer of thanksgiving. It's a prayer given, probably recited by the community in memory of what they knew they had to be grateful to God for. It is from the book of Exodus. It's chapter 15, verses 1 to, how far am I going to go? 1 to 18. And it is referred to as the Song of the Sea. It is reference to when the people of Israel are fleeing Egypt after the events of the Exodus, and they're being pursued by the Egyptian army, and the Egyptian army is defeated at the Battle of the Reed Sea, which in time became the Red Sea, but it's actually the Reed Sea. Anyway, so here goes the prayer. Then Moses and the Israelites sang this song to the Lord. I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and rider he has thrown into the sea. The Lord is my strength and my might, and he has become my salvation. This is my God, I will praise him. My father's God, and I will exalt him. The Lord is a warrior. The Lord is his name. Pharaoh's chariots and his army he cast into the sea. His picked officers were sunk in the Red Sea. The floods covered them. They went down into the depths like a stone. Your right hand, O Lord, glorious in power. Your right hand, O Lord, shattered the enemy. In the greatness of your majesty, you overthrew your adversaries. You sent out your fury. It consumed them like stubble. At the blast of your nostrils, the waters piled up. The floods stood up in a heap. The beat and congealed in the heart of the sea. The enemy said, I will pursue. I will overtake. I will divide the spoil. My desire shall have its fill of them. I will draw my sword. My hand shall destroy them. You blew with your wind. The sea covered them. Sank like lead in the mighty waters. Who is like you, O Lord, among the gods? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in splendor, doing wonders? You stretched out your right hand, the earth swallowed them. In your steadfast love, you led the people whom you redeemed. You guided them by your strength to your holy abode. The people heard, they trembled. Pangs seized the inhabitants of Philistia, and the chiefs of Edom were dismayed. Trembling seized the leaders of Moab. All the inhabitants of Canaan melted away. Terror and dread fell upon them. By the might of your arm, they became still as a stone. Until your people, O Lord, passed by, until the people whom you acquired passed by. You brought them in and planted them on the mountain of your possession, the place, O Lord, that you made your abode, the sanctuary, O Lord, that your hands have established. The Lord will reign forever and ever. This would have been a prayer recited as the community gathered. I'm not sure exactly what the location would be, but it would be a time of thanksgiving. It would be a community prayer recited by the community as a reminder of what they owed to God, of thanksgiving, of being grateful. It would also be the narrative of their story. Another communal prayer, and this was a bit shorter, is what is now referred to as the Shema Israel, revealed in that is written in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 to 9. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. Keep these words that I'm commanding you today in your heart. Recite them to your children and talk about them when you're at home and when you're away, when you lie down and when you rise. Bind them as a sign on your hand and fix them as an emblem on your forehead, and write them on your doorsteps, your house, and of your gate. So here we have, you recite the prayer. You recite it often. You recite it to your children so they will understand once more what God has done for them. There will be a kind of a summing up as a creedal statement. It's a prayer to God. That's the communal prayer. The communal prayers are obviously important, but the real part of the history of prayer in the Bible is the Psalms, both communal Psalms, which we've and we'll be using for worship on Sunday. We'll be singing on Psalm 100. But the Psalms, what they take is the personal. I talked in the non-Jewish and non-Christian world of the personal prayer, usually asking for something. Those prayers exist, those personal prayers exist, but also in the Psalms, what we hear is the personal cry to God in times of crisis. Sometimes looking for the healing, sometimes looking for a specific action, other times just wanting to. What's going on, God? What's going on? Tough questions. These are prayers that are, they're tough moments for the person reciting. There are why God? This is not a prayer that's looking for a specific resolution or a specific answer. This is a prayer where someone is reaching out to God saying, this is going on in my life. I am faithful to you. I have my faith that eventually things will work out, but would like a bit of a heads up, It's like I would like some kind of indication that it's not so much I'm offering you something so kind of fix the deal. I think what we have more in the Psalms and these more personal prayers is more of a dialogue, more of a kind of give and take. God, I am faithful to you. Where's the sign that you are faithful to me? And some of the Psalms are playing with us more than others. Some of the Psalms are kind of like, I have my faith, I like a watcher on the hill and all this kind of stuff. Those three. Others are more kind of cagey, like I have faith that you will respond. There's more of a sense of prayer being a way not just simply to ask God something, something kind of like, I give you this, you give me that, but more of a sense of what is going on in the world around us. And we hear this in particular in the book of Job, these kind of long conversations that could well be part of a prayer, like, praying to God to explain what's going on. The Psalms hold laments. Psalm 137 that that was a lament for what has been lost. The Psalms are referred to as the prayer book of the Bible, and I think that's a very apt description. And we often see the Psalms in prayer books, whatever. So what does that Psalm say? Psalm 137, if we read it as a prayer, it's a prayer of lament that ends with this grim kind of, God will strike you down. But the core of the prayer is crying out to God, saying, we have lost this. How can we endure? I'm sure there could well be other examples, there may well be different examples of prayer in the non-Jewish, non-Christian tradition that may have touched on these ideas. I'm not going to say that this was exclusively a part of this tradition. But I think in the Psalms in particular, you have this more kind of intimate vision of prayer. That prayer is a dialogue, not just a simple request. So that is the kind of the potted history of the First Testament vision of prayer. That you have the communal prayers of thanksgiving, giving thanks to God for all that God has done for the community, an awareness of the relationship between God and the community, that God has chosen his people to be God's presence in the world, and we are grateful for this situation. So, and then, as I said, the more personal, the more intimate connection with God, and that sense of the Psalms in particular being a way to kind of approach God in a way where it's not just, God will listen not just to a specific request, but because God wants to have a conversation. Just to kind of give personal example, like not just the Psalms, but there is a prayer. One of the most interesting stories is when Hannah in 1 Samuel chapter 2, verses 1 to 10. And this is kind of an interesting kind of example of the practical nature of prayer. Hannah prays to God, hoping for a child. And, apparently she prays in such a way that she draws the attention of the local clergy because she's praying the wrong way. Apparently the way she was praying out loud. And he kind of assumed she was drunk. So it's interesting that you have a personal, intimate prayer that she says in a way that's meaningful to her, but it doesn't fit into the standards of the community. And this is something that turns up now and again and continues to turn up. What is an appropriate prayer? And this is something we may be discussing. Like, what's meaningful to one person might not be meaningful to another. Our forms of worship, we do communal prayers. Some people, like that. Some people don't. One of the, just kind of as an anecdote, I know in my previous places where I've served churches, people wanted like the idea of the prayers of the people at that time of intercession, of being able to cry out, saying, I want to pray for such and such and such and such. Other people don't like it because it interrupts the flow of the prayer. And sometimes, some of the, I remember in one church I attended, there was a lot of people were kind of getting up, and sometimes you wondered, like, did they want to, as in the reading from the Gospel of Matthew, when Jesus talks about prayer, did people want you to hear what kind of prayers you had? So there's the whole kind of dynamic of the physical manifestation of prayer. What's appropriate, what's not, and that's an ongoing thing. So Jesus in prayer. That's Jesus is a first century Galilean Jew. He's part of the Jewish tradition of prayer. He will have known many of the prayers that we've made reference to, and he would know a whole whack of others. His prayer life would have been very much part of the Jewish tradition. He would pray as a Jew. He would say the Shema and be involved in the communal prayers of the community and all. And he would have went up to the temple to offer times of Passover and be part of the various prayer aspects. So there's no, and I don't think, what the prayer life that he would offer would not be staggeringly different from what he was used to. And one of the things is he would refer to the prayers of the First Testament. When he cries out, "What, O Lord, why have you forsaken me?" That comes from one of the Psalms. He is quoting the Psalm. It's a personal, intimate prayer of someone who feels that they have been forsaken by God. He says this in the time of his famine. So his prayer life is Jewish. He didn't, and so when he offered new prayers and new ways of whatever, they would be rooted in that tradition. And the prayers that he said, we don't, is it word for word what he said? We don't know, because once more it comes from oral transmission. When was the Lord's Prayer first written down? The Gospel of Mark doesn't mention it. The first mention of the Lord's Prayer is in the Gospel of Matthew. Luke has a slightly different version. John doesn't mention it either. So in terms of being written down, we could say probably about maybe 30, 40 years after Jesus first said it. It could have been written down before. We don't know. We don't have any of the documents. So what I'm going to read is the Gospel of Matthew, passage chapter 6. And we will be our scripture reading for the Sunday as well. But I'm going to read from chapter 6. Beware of practicing your piety before others in order to be seen by them, for then you have no reward from your Father in heaven. So whenever you give alms, do not sound a trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in synagogues and in the streets, so that they may be praised by others. Truly I tell you, they have received the reward. But when you give alms, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, that your alms may be done in secret, and that your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And whenever you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and at the street corners, so that they may be seen by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward. But whenever you pray, go into your room and shut the door and pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. When you are praying, do not heap up empty phrases as the Gentiles do, for they think that they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like that, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. Pray then in this way. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors. And do not bring us to the time of trial, but rescue us from the evil one. Amen. So we have instructions from Jesus on how to pray. And he seems, these are particularly, I would suggest from that these are the personal prayers that you want to offer to God. The Lord's Prayer, which in the Gospel of Matthew, it follows the Beatitudes. And so what we have is, I would suggest, at least as far as Matthew is concerned, that by reciting the prayer and by living the prayer, you would help to bring the world into effect of the world of the Beatitudes. The language of the prayer is an invitation to God of your willingness to be part of this vision of the kingdom of God. It is a request that God strengthen us, God be with us, God be present to us, so we can be part of that fulfillment of the kingdom. It is also a commitment from us that we will do what we can in recognition of what has been done for us. So, when the language talks about we will forgive others our debts as God has forgiven our debts of sin. So that kind of the prayer is a personal prayer of what we will do in relationship with God, but it's also a communal prayer in the sense of what we will do in response to the challenges of the world around us. That we are aware of our place within the world, that we can do something about the world because we are part of the vision of the kingdom of God. So it's a statement of faith, like the Shema Israel that we heard from Deuteronomy and some of the blessings in the First Testament. It becomes a communal prayer for the community, the Christian community, to recite together as a communal prayer of thanksgiving that we are part of God's children, and an invitation for us to continue the work. It can be a prayer of confession, it can be a prayer of intercession, and it can be a prayer of thanksgiving. We give thanks because we are part of the kingdom that is coming. So it's a wonderful prayer that has been one of the cornerstones of Christian belief and Christian practice. I think it's both belief and practice for 2,000 years. Well, 2,000 years, enough. And but there are specifics about the Lord's Prayer as a prayer itself, but with the way that blends these kind of various aspects together. So prayer would become part of the life of the early church. We hear from Paul when Paul talks about these early worship services where people would gather, that people would bring a variety of gifts for the worship life to flourish. And one of those gifts would be people would bring a prayer. They would maybe work on a prayer and as a thanksgiving to God, as an invocation to God for something about the life of the community. God give us wisdom to discern the future of our community, or a prayer to God to help them in a difficult time. Pray for guidance or whatever. So the prayer life of the early communities of the early church would be very, would be part of was it ritualized in the way it has become? Probably not in the beginning, but I wouldn't be surprised if people started writing some of these prayers down and started sharing around with other people. There are various prayers that Paul himself used, and Paul uses various blessings in particular, and various kind of invocations of the Christian God. When it comes to celebrating communion, I think what we have in Paul's letter to the Corinthians is a prayer that would be said as part of the celebration of communion, where what he says, "For I received from the Lord," this is 1 Corinthians, "for I received from the Lord what I also handed on to you, that the Lord Jesus on the night when he was betrayed took a loaf of bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, 'This is my body that is for you. Do this in remembrance of me.' In the same way, he took the cup also after supper, saying, 'This cup is the new covenant of my blood. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes.'" This would be recited as a prayer as part of the Lord's Supper. It's kind of interesting, just as kind of an aside, like, when does a prayer become a piece of scripture? Can it still be both? And of course, it can. It's just it's odd that sometimes people can get into this kind of habit of thinking if it's in the Bible, if it's like Paul's letter or whatever, it's not really a prayer anymore. and like it's kind of an odd way of looking at it, but I think it's just, how do we discern what is prayer and what is not? So one aspect of prayer life in the early Christian communities that became an interesting development would have repercussions for faith in general is, what do you do when Christianity becomes more of a Gentile religion, where more of its adherents are more of its adherents are from a Roman or a Greek background, which means they are not Jewish in their understanding of prayer. That they are used to the idea of the communal festival prayer, which exists in the Jewish tradition, but they're also used to the specific requests of prayer to specific deities. The idea that God could be prayed to for the whole kit and caboodle, as it were. That I think for some people there was this kind of vague unease that you could pray to God for the survival of the whole community against those barbarians banging at the door, and then pray to the same God because you've got a hangnail. Like, how can't God delegate? And so one tradition that would start to evolve in the early Christian church would be the tradition of saints, in that you could pray to saints as various intermediaries. That if you had a particular health issue or whatever, or a particular problem in life, you would pray to God through the intervention, as it were, from a saint. And so you have this whole collection of saints, saints who had various responsibilities, that were a consequence of some action they had done in the past. Now, sometimes it could be quite torturous, where they got, my favorite example is the Saint Valentine. Saint Valentine, his life was not dedicated to romantic love whatsoever. From what I understand of it, one of his things was that he would give money to people so they can get married and all this kind of stuff. The nature of marriage not being based on romance, especially when you're throwing some money in the question. It's kind of interesting how you became romantic, these saints. But so you would pray to a saint, and you would find the appropriate saint, whatever. And and often these saints were historical figures within the church, known for a particular act of piety, a particular act of holiness. Some were more questionable than others in terms of their actual existence. From what I understand, Saint Christopher, the patron saint of travels, sometimes he's real and sometimes he isn't. It depends on what way the wind blows, I guess. But there was this whole various cults of saints, and churches would be established, and you would pray to the saints and whatever, and there'd be healing sites and all this kind of stuff, visions, whatever. So I think from some people's perspective that prayer had become part of an institutional life of the church. And one of the kind of interesting manifestations of that was the monastic movement. The monastic movement, which first began in the deserts of Egypt and Syria and Turkey, where people would flee the real world to find a place where they could pray to God in peace and quiet, and be involved in continuous life of ongoing prayer to preserve their immortal soul and such and such. Eventually would form communities of like-minded individuals. And so you would have monks and nuns in various communities, parts of various religious orders, St. Francis and others, where they would be praying as part of the life of that community, almost ongoing prayers. And in some churches, you would eventually see this kind of practice of people paying for prayers to be said on the behalf of various souls and whatever. So prayer becomes part of the institutional life of the church. It becomes part of the kind of the process where people are in line in wanting to find ways to talk to God. But there were many people throughout the medieval period of Europe where this was particularly the practice in the West, who were distinctly uneasy about this. Some felt that this devotion to the saints in particular was borderline idol worship. And a similar thing happened in the East over icons, but that's another topic as well. So when you were praying to the saint to help you get over your bad back, were you praying to God through the saint, or were you praying to the saint? And it was an interesting question. Like, what does it say about people's perception of God? Could God be contained? And isn't God all powerful? And so surely God can listen to your request at the same time as ending world hunger or whatever. So there was, and so this eventually would become one of the kind of the triggering points of the Reformation. That prayer itself had become this kind of institutional form that in some circles was seen as quasi-pagan. Like these saints had way too much influence, way too much power, and particularly in the more, and so when the Reformation happened, which is coming up next week, one of the aspects of the Reformation in some countries in particular was the removal of saints as people to be prayed to and all this kind of stuff. But saints were still seen as holy people. They didn't lose their holiness, but what they did lose was their ability to be seen as a connection between people and God. And particularly in the more like Presbyterian tradition, the Calvinist tradition, the Baptist tradition, and others, there was this sense of the saints were no longer required. God and Jesus and the Holy Spirit, that's all you needed. You pray to them. Don't pray to a saint or whatever. You still can call your church St. Peter or St. Paul or whatever. You don't. That's not a problem. But you don't pray to them as someone who you think can fix your problem. And in particular, prayer would be a way with them, and especially because it was almost like, and there was also, and I'm looking at the time and I want to start wrapping things up. One of the kind of the traditions of prayer that had evolved in the medieval period was the very mystical tradition. The people who would have, during times of prayer, would have these powerful, strange, mystical encounters with God that they would try to write down and share with others to inspire or whatever. I can throw out names such as St. John of the Cross, associate of St. Teresa of Avila, Hildegard, and Julia Norwich, others, Julian of Norwich. These were people who were medieval mystics, and their works were written down. And like, for instance, John of the Cross, he explored both contemplative and meditative prayer in the quest to affirm his love of God. He saw prayer as a path to free us from the limitations and distractions of the world and surround us so we can approach God as part of the growth of our souls. Prayer was a path for the soul to follow, and others would follow the path. So these mystics would kind of bring new versions of the Psalms of the past. The Psalms of the past were this kind of attempt to connect with God, to be close to God, to hear and to share our concerns. But these mystic prayers would be sometimes more mysterious, strange images, bizarre revelations that might draw the soul deeper. And some of them were very intense. Some of the language is very sensual and very profound for the people who were touched by that vision of prayer. But for others, they were just a little over the top, like it's kind of like that's how humans are. Some people find this very mean, very profound, very wow. Others are like, ooh, that kind of makes me feel funny. And so prayer, so the Reformation becomes a period of what is prayer for the life of the community? Now, for many Protestant churches, the more kind of like Congregationalist, Protestant, Presbyterian, whatever, the Psalms would be the prayer book. In fact, particularly the Presbyterian churches in Scotland, the Psalms would be the prayer and the hymn. Didn't need anything else. Didn't need any other hymns. You just sing some psalms and pray some psalms. So you'd have the communal psalms, the Psalm 100. All people are in there. Well, and then the Lord is my shepherd. So the wonder of the Psalms as the prayer book. You have Psalm 100, which is this communal prayer of thanksgiving. We give thanks to God for all that God has done. We're in this temple, the holy place. So we sing our songs of celebration. Psalm 23, this connection with God, this intimate journey with God, knowing that you're journeying with God for the difficulties of life. Yea, though I travel to the valley of death, yet I fear no evil. The same prayer book, given new life in the Protestant churches. And then of course you had other kind of quasi-reformed churches such as the Church of England, the Anglican Church, and then the Lutheran Church, who would have prayer books. When I started at the shared ministry in Invermere, one of the things I got for myself was a book of common prayer. Now, the United Church, we don't have that tradition. No, we have collections of liturgy. We have Celebrate God's Presence, which is a collection of prayers written by various people from other traditions, the Iona community, other nations. We have prayers by Christians from all around the world. We use that as part of our regular worship. But we don't have a mandated liturgy. We don't have the National Office of the United Church sending out an order of service that will be used by all the churches of the United Church. This is kind of the liturgy, as I learned, the Anglican Church of Canada follows, there are two books to follow. There's the Book of Alternative Services, which has a weekly service. And then there's the Book of Common Prayer, which is the more traditionalist. If I was an Anglican, I'd be giving a whole course on that itself, the Book of Common Prayer. Just as a personal note, as I like to tell the story, I got the wrong one. Surprise, surprise. I bought the Book of Common Prayer and did not realize until I opened up and noticed I was praying for the president that I had bought the Book of Common Prayer for the Episcopalian Church, United States, which is the United States Anglican Church. So I have an American Book of Common Prayer, which is, but I use that for worship and not worship. I use it for pastoral care. I use that because I like the prayers of healing. I like it, and because usually I'm using it for people who are part of a different tradition, a different generation. The language is familiar to them, the type of way that the prayers talk about God and what in that time of sickness and that time of extremis and whatever, that language is relevant. So I know I've skipped a whole bunch of stuff in terms of the history of the Reformation prayer. I went straight into the present day, but I think that's okay. Because prayer as part of the life of the church today is, we have in the United Church, as myself, I use prayers from a variety of sources. I use prayers, some dating back to the Bible itself, others from various sources over the ages, medieval, early church, 19th, 20th, 21st century prayers. I write my own. I also write a fair chunk of liturgy myself. But interesting enough, just today I received an email from the gathering people of the United Church, reminding them of this big event as someone has contributed to the gathering. So, and then that's something we can certainly talk about, when we talk about why, as I said, the conversation we'll have. Why do we pray? What does prayer mean for us? For me, prayer has always been the way of connecting with God in various fashions. So, we are prayer, personal, communal. Communal is part of our worship life. And when I write prayers or pick prayers, I usually I vaguely have a theme. Sometimes I go on, but this Sunday, for example, I'll be talking a lot about various types of prayer, whatever. So I think at this point, I'm going to kind of wrap things up in terms of the lecture part, the historical part. I think I've kind of given a good beginning of why people pray, of historical understanding. As I said, the conversation we'll have will be why do we feel the need for prayer today? What do we hope to achieve? Like I've talked, what historically people have hoped to achieve. But what do we hope to achieve? What is prayer to us? What is prayer as part of the life of the church? As I said, the United Church believes that prayer is a critical part of the worship life of the congregation, but we don't have a standard form of liturgy. Now, in Voices United, we do have a collection of prayers that we use that could be used if you wanted to have a morning prayer. And this will be my last couple of minutes. I've in the past I've talked about the importance of healing prayers. For example, what is the purpose of a healing prayer? In the past, it was probably seen by many people as a way to talk to God and ask God, "Can you heal me?" Is it still part of that purpose, that vision of prayer? I think for many it is. When I engage in a healing prayer with someone who comes to me and prays, asks for prayer, I'm not going to say no if the miracle occurs. Honestly, not. But I also see the importance of prayer as a connection with someone to say that you are not alone. That when someone is praying with you, when you've asked for prayer and when someone prays with you, they are being reminded that they're not alone. Now, the one thing I also want to stress is you should always ask for permission to pray for someone. Just don't willy-nilly say, "I'm going to pray for you," whatever. Some people these days, some people are uneasy about that, and that needs to be respected. And I think even that request, ask, "Do you mind if I pray for you?" Once more, I think that's even more a reminder of the respect behind prayer. That you respect someone else's opinion, to ask them, "Do you want me to pray for you?" That you're giving them the choice, you're giving them the opportunity to be part of that dialogue. And if they don't want to be part of that dialogue, then you respect their choice. It seems counterintuitive that we should just pray for them willy-nilly. Well, prayer is part of a dialogue with God. It begins with respecting God, that God will listen. If you can't do it to people around you, then do you expect God to listen? So yeah, it's complicated. And and this is strictly my own sense of when it's appropriate to offer prayer or not. Don't get into the habit. I used to have this very bad habit of using prayer as a threat. I kind of I'll pray for you. I'll just won't say what I'm praying for. This reference to a kind of a pretty awful joke from one of my favorite TV shows. Kind of that's it. But to kind of wrap things up, prayer. I've always felt that prayer is a way for us to try and connect with the divine, and it's rooted on a fairly fundamental problem that God, the divine, whatever we picture it as, can be an overwhelming force. It is something that can be so difficult to quantify in our own human perspective. Prayer is a way for us to begin that journey of being in relationship with God in a way that we will understand one another. And that is a wondrous thing, and it's a challenging thing to find that process, to find that way of being in relationship through words. And I like that passage from Romans when Paul says, sometimes we don't have the words, but the Spirit knows. And sometimes that's why silence can be the best prayer. You don't know the words. So let the silence have that moment. And maybe when the silence is over, we've heard something, something's been revealed to us, and then maybe we will have the words. So let's just close with prayer. God, thank you for this moment. Thank you for this time. We give thanks to the presence all around us of your love, your grace, your mercy. And we give thanks that you listen to us in prayer. Amen.